Hi, Doris. I am so glad to be speaking with you today. Thank you so much for joining me and for leading this talk on, your Jewish heritage and how that's influenced your restaurant and what you do there. So tell me a little bit about you and, when you started My Favorite Foods and how long it's been there.
Okay. Well, as I had told you before, that I was born in Vienna, and at the beginning, when Hitler marched into Vienna, and things were very, very difficult, especially for Jewish men, where they were being picked up left and right. And my father knew that he had to get out of there. And he did go from embassy to embassy, and no one would give a visa to a Jewish person, especially. And also he lost his statehood. They took away his, that what they call in German Staatenlos. He became stateless. And then one day he got an answer from the Italian government that they would be willing to give him a visa. And that's where my journey really started, where we were free prisoners of Mussolini. And we ended up, and my father was sent to a concentration camp in Italy, but then he requested a special permission to go and be with his wife and his baby, meaning me. And we ended up living in a beautiful little town called Guardiagrele that is in the province of Chieti, and that's where my formative years started. So, that was a tremendous influence on my life.
So that's how it started. I mean, your father, what I know from you already is that he was an extraordinary man, and your family and the influence that the Italian culture and people and that warmth, the way that that left an impression on you. And when you started your restaurant, years later you started the restaurant there, My Favorite Foods, in New York City.
Prior to that, when I decided, after I got married and we moved to Great Neck, and there I was with my 5 children, my husband, my 5 children, my dog, my 4th station wagon, Chevy convertible. I had achieved the American dream. But as a woman, I realized that if anything ever happened, what am I going to do? I have no profession. And that's when I decided, as my kids were getting older and going off to college, that I was going to turn an avocation, because I loved to bake. And I did a lot of that. And that's when I decided that it's very important for me to turn an avocation into a vocation. So my best friend at that time and I decided to open up a little bakery in Great Neck called My Most Favorite Dessert Company. And that's how it all began. And we really got a great reputation, because the local bakeries, which were good, didn't start their products from scratch as we did. We did the whole beginning to the end, from the flour to the sugar to the shortening. And we turned out wonderful baked goods. And that's how we started. But then I had the desire and the wish to open up in Manhattan. I mean, who would even think about that? It's like to have such nerve to be able to do that, not really knowing the terrain completely. So that's where I moved. And I had a rude awakening that in order to make it in New York, I was very fortunate because I got great reviews from Florence Fabricant of the New York Times. But then things, you know, people get, they go back to where they, there's a loyalty that comes in, although we had a very loyal following, you know, things shifted and I had to pay my rent. And a lot of people said to me, why don't you, you know, do breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever you like. And I thought, well, that could be something. And I had to make the decision of what kind of food am I going to serve? And as I told you, Fatin, the influence of my father and who he was and who he stood for, he never, ever, ever compromised his Judaism or his dietary laws. So what, you know, comes around goes around, and all he had was vegetarian food and lots of pasta. So, and that's what it came to, a conclusion that I had to respect who my father was and how proud he was of who he is. And he never compromised that. I would have to honor that on one hand for him, and on the other hand, because vegetarian food has no prejudice and it resonates with anyone, whether you are an Orthodox Jew, a conservative, Reform, Christian, Muslim, you know, it's a universal, it's universal food, and there's no discrimination. And that to me, discrimination to me has always been a very important factor. And that I was able to do this, whether people accepted it or not, because of their own prejudices was their thing. But for me, I was a restaurant where everyone could eat and have delicious food. So, but when I started on Madison Avenue, I just had a cafe house, you know, where we served coffee and delicious cakes. But that did not pay my rent, and that's why we evolved into food. And there was the decision. Actually, when I first started, it was almost a complete Italian menu. And then we did evolve, and we became more not more cosmopolitan, but more American-like, that it was food that people in the neighborhood or all over really enjoyed eating.
Yes, no, that's, you know, if we look at what a beautiful story. I mean, first of all, that your father had that much of an influence on you, and also the just knowing what you said about no discrimination, that, like, you know, everyone can feel comfortable by coming there, and to know how you started. So going from Great Neck and you know, starting with the baking and bringing that over to Manhattan, good for you. You know, that's amazing as a woman, and as a, you know, with like you said, you turned your avocation into a vocation, and you have the heart to bring forth what your heritage stands for, what your heritage stands for. And what I hear from you, so knowing that, you know, it sounds like it's from a spiritual and a cultural point of view, that this is such an important thing. It's beyond just the food. Like you were saying, the food is a way for people to feel comfortable, it sounds like. So tell me a little bit more about how, you know, a little bit more about the passion behind the restaurant as it is today. So now it's more, like you said, it's influenced, obviously has some influences from Italy, right? Because, you know, I'm going to tie it a little bit back to sense of origin, right? So, you know, Austria and Italy, there's 8 countries that border, and then all of those countries kind of influence one another. So, you know, the closer that people are to the borders, the more regionally some of these things influence one another. So like you said, with the pastas, your father was very big on the pastas, but because of your, it sounds like, what I take from that is because of because of the heritage, such a big part of you and your family, that that's part of you, that's part of your heart, and you brought that forth into the experience that people can have.
Right. And you know, when people would come in, they would say, this is not the usual energy that you find in other restaurants, that Europeans felt very comfortable there. There was, in a way, a melding of different, what do you call it again, cultures, and a little bit of Viennese because of the cakes and the and the display of the beautiful cakes and the food and the coffees, so that it made me really feel good that I was able to project that energy into the restaurant. And especially, you know, being on Madison Avenue, where everyone in the neighborhood loved to come in because they had they loved the soups, the coffee, the cakes. And then as we went along, there was something else that we had to overcome, and that was Passover. You know, Passover, you can't have any cakes with flour, and everything has to be kosher for Passover. So when I was on Madison Avenue, I realized, because I'm a public person, so that I have to stand behind who I am and what my religion expects from me, you know, as far as what we do. So that actually, Fatin, that was when I decided that I would go under supervision, where I would need the higher power, you know, the organizations that would give you the kashrut, which means the stamp that you're under a supervisory board. And I decided that it would be a well-known supervisory board that the whole world would recognize. So these were tremendous considerations that I had to make a decision on, which I did. You know, I mean, it took a lot. It costs a tremendous amount of money. So you're always worried about the bottom line, because my business is very labor intensified. So it takes a lot. And I decided that, you know, usually people would say, oh, Passover, the cakes are awful. And for me, I always have to prove a point. And we have the reputation, I mean, people would stop me in the street and say, are you sure that that was kosher for Passover? I said, let me tell you, absolutely. I think the Wall Street Journal once did an unbelievable story about the process of becoming kosher for Passover. I mean, it is a mind-boggling experience, because you literally have to change everything and do a thorough cleaning out of everything. And we're on the threshold of that. But to me, it has such symbolism of a new beginning and a new start for the year. And to me, that's always a sign of optimism of how things can change again for the new year.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so when you talk about, you know, that it's not just, I mean, obviously the spiritual and the cultural point of view is big, you know, and so when it comes to the cultural story behind your menu choices, it's all characterized by a very spiritual and cultural point of view, but in a way that's so unique because it's also universal. So like you said, there's, when it comes to vegetarian food, the same with you know, things, your menu items being kosher, that there is no prejudice. And like you You said, anyone can eat it. If you're Jewish, you have the mechanisms in place for, any practice of Judaism. Anyone who's practicing any whether you said it Orthodox or Reformed or what have you, they feel comfortable coming in. But also vegetarian food is universal. So whether you're European and you feel comfortable because it's European, or you come in because you're vegetarian, you feel comfortable because of that you personify that, so that my most favorite fruit is everyone's most favorite food. That comes out to me because you made, like, I kind of keep circling back to this, but because you made it from your heart, so that what comes from the heart is spiritual and cultural things. There are emotions that you feel and you express, and so that's what I hear from you, and how that comes across through your menu, and how I'm sure it relates back to how it's characterized, again, going back to your father and his heritage, obviously the Austrian heritage, but finding that comfort and love for your family that you found in having gone to Italy before you came over. So I feel like all of that characterizes what you're saying, and that comes through. And it's such a beautiful, wonderful concept, and so that you're so intentional with everything there. Does that kind of encapsulate?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's what I get across. That's what I get from what you're saying. And so, just going into, if we can talk a little bit more about, from the Jewish cultural standpoint, what do you think are kind of some of the most defining qualities? I know you mentioned, like, defining qualities of the recipes or the presentation, and of course the culture, because like you said, for Passover, anything, I think it relates back to anything being unleavened, right? So for Passover, right? So how do you feel that, if you look at the menu, obviously the vegetarian aspect of it, the kosher aspect of it, the respecting the the major Jewish holidays, tell me a little bit about how do you kind of summarize that in terms of defining qualities?
Okay, so when you go under supervision, it's not just for the food that you serve, but it has very strict implication. Okay, so comes Friday, we have to close at 2:00. Okay, so that the presence is not only in the food, but also in all the holidays that are involved. And I remember when I decided to go under supervision on Madison Avenue, that we would be closed on the Sabbath. And that scared me so much, because that was my busiest day. And I said, OMG, what am I going to do? But once my decision was made, I was very happy about that, because you celebrate everything that has to do under the heading Jewish and kosher. There was no doubt about that. But that doesn't only come for Friday before the Sabbath, but also for all the holidays. So we have, as tonight, I don't know if you know, Fatim, but it is Purim. The going and listening to the story about Purim in the synagogues. And every time you hear the name Achashverosh, they take the groggers and they try to get, to take the noise so that you didn't hear the name. And also you eat Hamantaschen, and those are cookies that you make in the shape of a hat, a three-cornered hat. So today, we're still open, but comes Passover, we close early the night of Passover Seders. And during the holiday, we are closed, but then we're opened again until the end of Passover. So if you figure out, and there's so many beautiful holidays, like one of my most favorite holidays is Sukkot, the festival of the huts. And I remember that when we were living in Great Neck, I mean, there were a lot of Jewish people there, but they're not really observant, or they know about the holiday, but it's not well known. And when one of my best friend's daughters was getting married, I decided to make her the shower. And I had somebody, a window designer artist, come in and build the sukkah for me. And he went to the library and he did it perfectly. And that's what I had. And everyone said, oh my God. And of course I had to have the luncheon was all the traditional foods that you serve on Sukkot. And that was prior to my restaurant. And I found that so satisfying, so that when I opened up on 45th Street in the theater district, I had this whole outdoor cafe, and that I turned into a sukkah. And it was magical when you walked into that sukkah, because you have all the grasses and the fruits hanging. Have you ever been to one, Fatim? Look it up.
I haven't. No, I haven't.
It's so beautiful. It is unbelievable.
I just wrote that down for myself so I can Google.
And I remembered somebody did a little article in the New York Times about how she was walking down 45th Street, and lo and behold was this sukkah. And she said it took her back to her childhood. And when you walked into that sukkah, you were transformed. You felt as if you were somewhere outside of New York City. So for me, to bring that awareness to people, and even on Madison Avenue, people would say, oh, you know what? We know it's a holiday because my most favorite dessert company is closed. So it was also a point of education for, not for Orthodox Jews, but for conservative and Reformed, for sure. So for me, I felt as if I was really a source of pride of where I came from and who I am. So in a way, that's a gift, I think. What do you think?
It is. It really is. I mean, because when you were saying that, it became a gift for people. So when you're walking on Madison Avenue, I mean, how everyone's, either staring at the ground or stressed out or walking, but the energy, going back to what you were saying about the energy of your restaurant is built on that philosophy. And I think I heard you say, I can't remember here or when we spoke before, is that your restaurant is a living philosophy. It's a living, spiritual, beautiful energy for people. And so if physically they see, oh, it's closed, oh, it must be a holiday, that's a spiritual thing, so even when you're closed, you exist that, and so I think that's so great. And obviously when we talk about the defining qualities, it being a source of pride for you, for the Jewish community, representing the traditional Jewish culture, and universally speaking, Jewish culture, it represents that, as well as the the European heritage of your family, And so I just think it's great because it's not just the food, it's the whole energy of it. And so that brings me to my last question, Doris. So if you think of the spirit or way of life that you grew up with, and that you carry through to your restaurant, tell me about some time where you've traveled abroad. If you think about it, what spirit or way of life do you carry through, the experience at the restaurant that you feel is renewed? Like,
oh, it's like in a way, there's an affirmation, and I'll tell you one little story.
Sure.
Was for years now, we go to Italy, of course. And at one time, it was only before I reconnected with Guardiagrele. So at one time, it was always going to Tuscany, okay? And what was wonderful was that we were in Florence, and we went to I forgot which museum, and I was with my oldest daughter, and there was a man coming out of the museum, and I don't know, he asked my daughter something, and it turns out that he was from Israel, and he was wearing a yarmulke, and they started talking, and that he was going to New York City, all right? So my daughter said to him, well, when you go to New York, can I suggest my mother's restaurant? And here he's from Israel, and he says, what's the name of your mother's restaurant? And she said, my most favorite dessert company. And he said, that is my most favorite place when I come to New York. That's my first stop. So can you imagine that?
Yeah.
And even when we went to one of the hilltop towns, we were at a restaurant that I love there. And we're sitting there and talking, and they were Americans. I think they were from New York, and they weren't religious in any way. And then when I mentioned my most favorite dessert company to them, and they have been there. So what's so gratifying is that here people literally come from all over the world to come to my place. So that to me is so heartening, and I feel as if I've really accomplished something to respect who I am, where I came from, and the religion that I represent.
Right. Yeah. And you know why I feel like that comes through? Because it's authentic. So even though it came from your daughter, but this is what I get from you too, is that it's all from the heart. So it's genuine. And that's why people gravitate towards that. I feel, that they felt something genuine when you were speaking with them, even though you didn't know them. You're across the world, they're in Italy, or your daughter, and they're speaking to your daughter, but it's something about that connection sparked something in them, and so how great that it's full circle, that not just people in New York, you're making them feel comfortable, but everyone that you touch when your family touches when you're traveling. I think that's what that
I just
speaks
like
to
to
me.
tell you one more little story to bring it all together. I had mentioned to you about Ruth Gruber, all right,
Yes.
who was the escort on Henry Gibbons that brought the 982 refugees as guests of the United States of America. And the invitation was given by President Roosevelt, okay? So there we were housed in Fort Ontario, which was an army base that wasn't being used. Many years later, I met Ruth Gruber, and I guess it's about 40 years ago. And look, I had such losses from the very beginning, with my father's death, with the loss of my language, the country, the whole 9 yards, that I really, I knew about Ruth, but I never had any connection with her. But 40 years ago, we were at a Hanukkah party, and we're at my friend Fred and Eileen Schwartz, and he used to be Fred the Furrier, okay? And at this Hanukkah party that I was with some of my children, Fred said to me, you know, I met somebody that you should meet. I was at the opening of the Albany Museum the Holocaust Museum in Albany, and I met Ruth Gruber. Maybe you should call her. She's the escort that brought you to the United States. You know, I knew about her. My mother knew about her, but we were not in that milieu, so to speak. So my daughter said, Mom, are you going to call her? And I said, for what? You know, too much has happened, too much under the bridge. But she called her and said to Ruth, hi, my name is Laura Schechter Chass, and you brought my mother to the United States of America, and I would like to meet you. And Ruth said, I will be delighted. And that's when we met, and she came to have lunch with me at the restaurant on Madison Avenue. And that was the beginning of a love affair. You know, we connected immediately. And she was my mentor. She was the one that really pushed and spurred me on and always gave me so much confidence. So I just want to end with who she was. And she was going to be honored by the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And they called her and they said, we're coming to New York, but we want to have a brunch in your honor. And she said, oh, that'll be delightful. And where are you having this brunch? And they said, at the Waldorf Astoria. And she said, what does the Waldorf Astoria have to do with me? If you are going to have a brunch, you have to have it at Doris Schechter's restaurant, my most favorite food at that. So, and that's what they did. And it was such a wonderful brunch. And then she made me get up to speak, and I've never spoken in public. And I just could not believe the respect that she had for me and the feeling that she had for me, and what a powerful woman, because they all had the best time. They loved it. And I think my first book was coming out at that time. And they said, we're going to have a big luncheon in Chicago, and we want you to be there with Ruth so we could launch your book. Wow. So that, you know, how lucky am I to have a woman like that in my life? I mean, there's so many other stories, but I wanted to tell you this one to show you how she was proud that I did this, and that everyone could come and just love everything that they had.
Yes, yes. She had an influence on your resolve. I mean, you have the resolve yourself. You had the resolve to succeed, to live out the American dream, to live out your vocation. But she, like you said, gave you the confidence, and that came full circle for you. And you know, that as a living affirmation, speaking to, you know, something being genuine and being true to yourself and to your heritage and your spiritual beliefs. I feel like that's, like I said, it's a very rich experience. And so when people walk through the doors there at my most favorite food, I know right now it's outdoor dining, but that energy transcends, you know, the physical, like whether they're inside or outside, or they're with you, or they just experience your menu. You know, that all comes out so beautifully. And I really appreciate you sharing that story with me, and the influence that, you know, Ruth Gruber had on you and on so many, you know, Jewish Americans that came, you know, to New York, you know, at that time, and to see that what you've made of yourself and your family and the legacy of your family through the restaurant. I think that people, you know, when they hear this, your talk about your heritage and your culture, that they're going to get that. And I really want to encourage everyone to come and visit you and experience that.
Yeah, and also, I was able to do 2 books, and I'm hoping to do a vegetarian cookbook as a gift for who I am and where I came from.
That's beautiful. We're going to look forward to that. And I hope that everyone that tunes in to listen to this, will come and visit and learn more and experience that. And we'll look forward to that book and more from you. And you're such a wonderful, warm, glowing person. And I wish you much continued success as you continue on. Thank you so much, Doris. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I had a great time with you. Thank you. Thank you.